The rain fell in thin silver sheets across the ruined border moon, where human medic Elia's ward moved between broken stones and flickering emergency lights, carrying a worn medical pack and the quiet, stubborn hope that someone might still be alive. He had come alone, as he often did, following distress signals others feared, believing that pain sounded the same in every language. When he found her, she lay half-buried beneath shattered alloy, armor torn open. Blood the color of deep amethyst soaking into the ash, Elias did not recognize the sigils etched into her plate, nor the crown-shaped circlet bent against her dark hair. He only saw a wounded being gasping for breath. He knelt, ignoring the faint hum of power that made the air vibrate around her body. Her eyes fluttered open, burning gold, filled with fury and confusion. Then dimming as pain dragged her back toward unconsciousness, Elias spoke softly. Not knowing if she understood his words, telling her she was safe, telling her he would help. His scanner screamed warnings, energy readings off every scale, but he silenced it and focused on the wound. The gash across her side was deep, edges cauterized by some terrible weapon. He cleaned it carefully, hands steady, breathing slow. He worked for hours, stitching torn flesh, applying human biogel, wrapping the wound with practiced care, all the while unseen by him. Distant fleets searched the stars in terror, for their empress had vanished, and with her, the balance of the galaxy trembled. She awoke in a shelter of cracked stone and humming heaters, the scent of antiseptic sharp in the air. Pain pulsed through her body, but it was distant, controlled. She had endured far worse on battlefields that decided the fate of civilizations. The Empress of the Kazun Dominion, undefeated warrior, living legend, now lay wrapped in simple fabric, tended by a human. She watched Elias as he slept nearby, exhaustion etched into his face. His mind was an open book to her senses, honest. Unguarded, he did not know who she was, did not kneel, did not fear. This unsettled her more than any enemy blade. When he woke, he met her gaze calmly, offered water, asked with gestures and gentle words if she could drink. She accepted, measuring him in her empire. Mercy was weakness. Healing was a tool of control. Yet this human expected nothing. As days passed, Elias treated her wound daily, speaking of small things, of lost cities, of why he chose to save strangers. She listened, silent, learning. Outside, shockwaves rippled through space. Admirals argued, warriors prepared for war, believing their empress slain. None imagined her here, sharing warmth with a fragile human who dared to see her as simply alive. The wound healed faster than Elias expected, her body adapting, knitting itself with frightening efficiency. He joked about her being a fast healer, unaware that she could shatter continents with her bare hands. One night, raiders descended on the moon, scavengers drawn by the earlier battle, weapons fire tore through the camp. Elias grabbed his pack, pulling her toward cover. Fear flooded him, honest and sharp. The Empress felt it, and something ancient stirred. She stepped forward. The air bending around her, with a single motion, she disarmed the attackers, gravity itself answering her will. They fled screaming into the dark. Elias stared, stunned, finally understanding that he had not rescued an ordinary alien. She turned to him, expecting terror, hatred, or submission. Instead, he asked if she was hurt. The question struck deeper than any blade. For the first time in centuries, the Empress hesitated, the mask of absolute power cracked. She told him the truth. Of who she was, of the wars she had won, of the worlds that burned at her command. Elias listened, heart pounding. Yet his voice remained steady as he said that wounds still needed care, no matter who bore them. The Dominion found them days later, warships blotting out the sky. Generals knelt as the Empress emerged, whole once more, power radiating like a newborn star. They begged her to return, to punish the galaxy for her injury. Elias stood behind her, small and insignificant by every metric that had ever mattered. She felt the old hunger for conquest rise, then felt his presence, the memory of gentle hands, of kindness without motive. She turned to her armies and spoke words that stunned them into silence. There would be no retaliation, no cleansing fire. She declared a ceasefire across her empire, naming humanity not as prey or rival, but as protected kin. The shock echoed through hyperspace, allies and enemies alike reeled. The Empress offered Elias a place at her side, not as a subject, but as a reminder. He declined the throne, choosing instead to return to the quiet work of healing. She let him go, understanding that power did not always mean command. Stories spread across the galaxy, altered by fear and hope. They said the Empress had been defeated by a human, others whispered she had fallen in love. The truth was simpler and far rarer. She had been saved, and in being saved she had changed. The Dominion became something new, its wars fewer, its rulers more cautious on distant worlds. Medics spoke of an example of treating every life as worth saving. Even when it wore the face of an enemy, Elias continued his journeys. Never seeking credit, unaware that his quiet compassion had reshaped history, and somewhere among the stars, the most powerful warrior in the galaxy carried a scar not as a mark of weakness, but as a reminder that even an empress could bleed, and that sometimes the greatest strength was shown by the hand that chose to heal. Time moved differently after legends were rewritten, slowing in places where history had expected fire and instead found breath and patience. Elias returned to his wandering path, drifting from station to station, moon to moon, carrying the same worn medical pack now repaired a dozen times. He treated miners crushed by collapse, refugees burned by plasma leaks, soldiers from rival factions who stared at him with suspicion before pain humbled them all, everywhere he went. Doors opened more easily than before, not because people knew his face, but because somewhere ahead of him, stories traveled faster than ships, stories of a human medic who had healed the alien Empress herself. Elias never confirmed them, never denied them. He simply worked, because that was who he was. Far across the stars, the Empress ruled in a way no one had prepared for. The throne world of Karzun had once been a place of constant readiness, banners of conquest hanging beneath weapons hot with recent use. Now silence shared space with purpose, training halls became places of discipline rather than brutality, fleets drilled for defense instead of invasion. The warrior caste struggled most, for they had been shaped by centuries of blood, yet even they felt it, the shift in the current of fate. Their empress still trained daily, still defeated any challenger with terrifying ease, but she no longer killed them for the lesson. She taught them restraint, precision, the difference between strength and cruelty. In the privacy of her chambers, she sometimes removed her armor and traced the scar along her side, the one Elias had closed with human hands and stubborn care. It was faint now, but it pulled at her senses like gravity, reminding her of the cold stone shelter, the humming heaters, the quiet human voice that never demanded, never feared. She had faced ancient star beasts and living weapons forged from suns, yet nothing had unsettled her like the calm refusal to kneel. It forced her to examine the foundation of her empire, to ask what victory truly meant when no one remained to stand against you. The galaxy reacted unevenly. Some powers celebrated the ceasefires, rushing to sign treaties they never believed possible. Others suspected deception, convinced the Empress was merely waiting, preparing a war that would make all others seem gentle. Spies were sent, probes dispatched, entire civilizations watched the borders of the Dominion with nervous anticipation. What they saw confused them. Trade corridors opened, prisoners exchanged, relief fleets escorted rather than destroyed. The most powerful warrior in the galaxy had not become weak. She had become unpredictable, and that frightened them more than open conquest ever had. Elias felt the consequences of that unpredictability in small ways. A patrol that would once have seized him for interrogation now offered escort. A border station waved him through with only a brief scan and a respectful nod. He overheard whispers in docking bays, humans speaking of a strange new age, of enemies who hesitated before firing, of battles that ended before they began. He treated those who still suffered, because peace did not erase pain, but he noticed something else as well. Fewer children came to him with wounds from bombings. Fewer refugees arrived with the hollow eyes of those who had lost everything. One cycle on a remote agricultural world far from any major lane, Elias received a message encoded in frequencies few humans could even perceive. The translation was simple, almost hesitant: request for medical consultation, non-emergency. The sender did not sign a name, but he knew. He sighed, smiled faintly, and altered his course. World was quiet, oceans stretching beneath pale skies. The Empress waited alone on a cliff overlooking endless water. No guards, no fleet in orbit. When Elias approached, she turned, power contained but unmistakable. They regarded each other without ceremony, without hierarchy. She spoke first, telling him of unrest among distant systems, of rulers who mistook mercy for surrender. She asked him what he would do, not as a subject, but as a healer. Elias listened, then answered honestly. He said that wounds left unattended festered, that fear untreated became violence, that sometimes showing strength meant standing still and letting others decide who they wished to be. She considered his words longer than she ever had considered the pleas of defeated kings. In that moment, the galaxy balanced again, not on the edge of a blade, but on a conversation between two beings who should never have met. She thanked him, a word that once would have been impossible for her to speak. Then she asked him to stay, not permanently, not as a court figure, but as a teacher to train healers within her empire. To show them that saving a life did not diminish the one who saved it. Elias agreed, but only for a time. He taught them techniques, principles, but more importantly, he taught them presence. He showed warriors how to hold a wounded enemy without crushing them, how to listen to pain without turning away. At first they struggled, hands accustomed to weapons trembling when tasked with gentleness. Yet slowly something changed. Medics trained under him became symbols, welcomed even in systems that still feared the Dominion, because where they arrived, battles often ended before they began. When Elias finally left, the Empress did not ask him to return. She knew now that holding on was another form of conquest. She watched his ship disappear into the stars, feeling the familiar pull of solitude, but also something new, steadier. The galaxy continued, messy and uncertain, but no longer locked in a single brutal narrative. Centuries later, historians would argue about the turning point. Some would point to treaties, others to battles that never happened. A few would uncover fragmented records of a human medic and a wounded empress, dismissing them as myth. Yet among healers, soldiers, and those who walked the thin line between violence and mercy, the truth endured quietly, that the most powerful warrior in the galaxy was changed not by an enemy, not by defeat, but by a pair of steady hands that chose to heal first and ask questions later. Long after Elias Ward's ship vanished into the layered light of hyperspace, the changes he had set in motion continued to spread, not as a wave of command, but as a resonance, subtle and impossible to fully silence. On frontier worlds once scorched by Dominion advance fleets, old defenses rusted unused, not because they were no longer needed, but because no one came to test them. Farmers planted closer to former borders. Traders risked slower routes that cut through regions once considered certain death, and children grew up hearing stories where the Empress was no longer a nightmare whispered at night, but a distant, watchful presence that did not strike without reason. The Empress herself aged differently than legend predicted. Her kind lived long, sustained by power that bent biology, yet rulers like her were expected to burn out in glory or be torn down by challengers. Instead, she endured, steady as an anchored star. She still fought when required, still stood alone against threats that could unmake systems, but she chose her battles with care. And when victory came, it ended with containment rather than annihilation. Her warriors followed. Not because they feared her wrath, but because they had seen her mercy and knew it was not weakness. In the quiet hours before rest cycles, she sometimes replayed memories not of triumphs, but of small moments, Elias adjusting a field dressing, Elias scolding her gently for trying to stand too soon, Elias asking questions about her physiology with the same curiosity he showed any patient. These recollections grounded her more firmly than any throne ever had. They reminded her that identity was not forged only in conquest, but in how one responded when stripped of power and forced to trust. Elias continued his path, older now, his hair threaded with gray, his hands carrying the memory of thousands of lives held between them. He never settled permanently, but he returned often to worlds that remembered him. On some stations, murals depicted a human figure standing before a towering alien silhouette, hands raised not in surrender, but in care. He laughed when he saw them, embarrassed, insisting to anyone who listened that he had only done his job. On one remote outpost, during a supply run that should have been routine, violence flared suddenly. Pirates attacked with desperation born of hunger and fear. The skirmish was brief, Dominion patrols arriving faster than expected, weapons powered down as quickly as they had ignited. Elias moved instinctively among the injured, human and alien alike. As he worked, one of the pirates, barely more than a youth, stared at the Dominion insignia and asked in disbelief why they had not been executed. A Dominion medic answered simply, because the Empress decreed that survival was always preferable to revenge. That single sentence traveled farther than any fleet. The youth lived, left piracy, became a dockhand, then a healer's assistant, another small thread woven into a tapestry no one ruler could fully control. Years later, as Elias felt his strength wane, he received one final message, carried not by encryption, but by an envoy ship that landed quietly near his current camp. The Empress did not come in armor nor with ceremony. She came alone, walking the short distance with unhurried steps. They sat together beneath unfamiliar stars, speaking little, comfortable in silence. She thanked him again, not for saving her life, but for showing her what to do with it afterward. When Elias passed, peacefully, surrounded by those he had trained and inspired, the galaxy paused in ways it did not recognize at first. The Empress ordered no monuments, declared no holy days. Instead, she issued a single directive across all Dominion space, that medics were to be protected without exception, that any being carrying tools of healing was to be granted safe passage, regardless of allegiance. The order was obeyed more faithfully than any call to war ever had been. And so the echo endured, in scarred hands that chose gentleness, in warriors who hesitated before striking, in an empress who ruled not through fear alone, but through the memory of being vulnerable and cared for. The galaxy remained dangerous, vast, and imperfect, but woven through it was a quiet certainty that sometimes the greatest force in existence was not the one that conquered worlds, but the one that knelt beside the wounded and chose to help.